Welcome to our foundational lesson in our introductory course to user experience design. The objectives of this lesson are to help you understand where user experience design fits into the history of computing, to become familiar with some prominent authors in the user experience design domain, and also to understand some key user experience design terms and definitions. Every employer wants someone with extraordinary skills. Many companies want employees who can wear multiple hats. Larger organizations can afford to hire specialists, but even those companies tend to value people with a broad understanding of many areas. User experience designers, more than many other fields, fall prey to companies who want them to do everything from research to visual design to code. Job ads will ask for user experience designers who can create a visual brand style guide for online and print, design mobile apps, be Photoshop or Sketch experts, write advertising or marketing copy, lead out with business strategy, and perform ethnographic research and, at the same time, code in JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. It's usually not quite that bad, but there is definitely some high expectations of user experience designers. Additionally, not every company expects the same type of work from their UX team. We'll talk a little bit about many of these areas in this introductory course, but just realize there is a lot of work available for a designer who can understand and be conversant in more than one of these areas. We're going to jump way back for a minute to the early days of computing. The earliest computers were invented in the 1940s and were huge, covering 1,800 square feet in some cases. Users tended to be researchers at large educational or research institutions. The users of these computers would punch holes in cards to be inserted into the computers in order to make them compute. That computer interface for programmers was a physical tool that allowed the user to actually punch holes in thick stock paper cards. Gradually, researchers and developers were able to reduce computers' size. They became smaller and began to be used in business applications in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s. Academic and enterprise research organizations continued to invent and refine technologies like the mouse and graphical screen interfaces throughout the early years of computing. IBM, Xerox, and AT&T, for example, contributed to the development of important computing technologies that we might take for granted today. Meanwhile, researchers in human-computer interaction, or HCI, were investigating the impact and use of computer interfaces, the processes of technological development, and new applications of technology. HCI emerged as a design discipline, a science of design. The term usability emerged from the research done by researchers and human factors specialists in industry throughout the 70s and 80s. Usability simply means how easily someone can use a given digital interface or product. As with most industries, usability has evolved, and design principles that increase interface usability have grown and been refined over time. As the design process evolved, usability engineering became part of the lexicon. Researchers like Jakob Nielsen began promoting the idea of usability specifications, where usability was quantified and those specifications provided a goal for the iterative design cycles to try to achieve and measure progress along the way. They also advocated for more participatory design, where users took a more active role in the design process. Ethnographic techniques were incorporated in the design process as well, bringing researchers and designers into the context and situation of the user to observe them in their natural habitat, so to speak, and thus have a less biased environment in which to make better design decisions. As users became involved with the design process, user-centered design became the de facto design paradigm for computer science, with universities rolling out user-centered design courses in their computer science programs and designating user-centered design as a research focus. While HCI is not entirely forgotten, its influence as a discipline has waned in the wake of the internet and the age of the smartphone. HCI, and human factors were the key terms used during the 80s and into the 90s, but in 1993, a new term was coined that has caught hold and dominated the discussion of computer interface design outside of academia for most of the last 3 decades, and is used to describe the activities of interface designers in the digital age. That term is user experience design, or UX. Cognitive psychologist Don Norman coined the term user experience when naming his research group at Apple in 1993. Norman had been hired to build a team to improve Apple products. In 1998, Norman told Peter Merholz at the design agency Adaptive Path that he thought the term had begun to lose its value. "I invented the term," he said, "because I thought human interface and usability were too narrow. I wanted to cover all aspects of the person's experience with the system, including industrial design, graphics, the interface, the physical interaction, and the manual. Since then, the term has spread widely, so much so that it is starting to lose its meaning." Shortly after Norman gave user experience a name, Alan Cooper published About Face, a seminal volume on interface design. The second edition in 2003 introduced a new term to the lexicon, interaction design, and Cooper picked up a second author, Robert Reimann. In the year 2000, Jesse James Garrett, who incidentally first popularized the term AJAX for asynchronous JavaScript, published a book proposing a clarified model for user experience design on the web and justifying UX as a discipline. Garrett's model of user experience design for the web illustrates an effective framework that captures the essence of the user experience design process. It warrants additional study, but we won't dive into it in this lesson. Throughout the 80s and 90s, design of software and digital experiences in general gradually moved from a waterfall process to a more iterative and nimble approach to design, embracing agile and lean principles. The rigidity of the waterfall process, which relies on completion of a fully specified product design before development can begin, was not feasible in the condensed product cycle interface designers found themselves in. Because many current technologies allow for relatively easy updating of features and code within an application, the cycle from planning to deployment became much shorter. Designers and researchers began to consult users of their products in the design process rather than solely at the end to evaluate the product. User testing became a formative activity, part of the act of designing, rather than a summative activity merely evaluating the success of a completed design. The Lean movement brought Lean to UX as well. In 2013, Jeff Gothelf and Josh Seiden published Lean UX to help understand how a UX process could be brought into the tight cycles of a lean development environment. There are numerous debates about what it means to be a user experience designer today. There are certainly myriad roles within the discipline. There are many who call themselves UX designers without understanding the existing foundations and fundamentals of the human-computer experience. We'll discuss some of the roles and directions UX is heading in another lesson, but for now, let's wrap up. We've covered a lot of ground today, and really only glanced off the surface of the history and context of user experience design. We have introduced you to UX as an outgrowth of the human-computer interaction and user-centered design paradigms. We've introduced terms such as user experience, usability engineering, and user-centered design. We've mentioned some prominent names in the UX field like Don Norman, Jakob Nielsen, and Jesse James Garrett, among others. We hope you have at least gained a sense of how UX design as a discipline has emerged from the broader world of technology.